Hi, everyone. Welcome to our channel. Douglas Macgregor, Secretary Blinken's assertion that the current situation is potentially the most perilous period in regional history, especially since World War II and possibly over the past 2 centuries. He emphasizes the extreme volatility and explosiveness of the situation, which many in the United States and Europe may not fully grasp. Douglas Macgregor highlights a critical failure within the U.S. government to acknowledge the current state of affairs, attributing it to events since October 7th in Gaza. He notes over 160 attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East and numerous attempts to disrupt vessels affiliated with the U.S. and Israel. He stresses that these events are not random occurrences, but deliberate actions with significant implications. The campaign aims for the expulsion or killing of Arabs in Gaza, which is the core issue. There's a failure to acknowledge that the misguided belief that Muslims inherently despise people in the West is baseless. This misconception directly contributes to the current situation. It's crucial to grasp this, as genuine efforts to halt attacks require the President of the United States to intervene and inform Mr. Netanyahu that continued actions won't be supported. This could potentially quell 99 of hostility and attacks against the United States. It's a failure easier to understand this on Capitol Hill, raises concerns about the escalation of tensions. There's a risk of a regional conflict, primarily involving Israel and the United States, with the possibility of terrorism within us, borders due to poor U.S. immigration policies. It's unwise to overlook this threat, especially considering the US's fervor for initiating a bombing campaign against Iran. Over the past few decades, there has been a deliberate campaign to vilify Iran as the source of all regional issues that Israel opposes. Israel has positioned Iran as its main adversary and believes that only by neutralizing Iran can it secure peace in the region. This narrative is misleading, as other states in the region are equally or more hostile than Iran. However, Israel's influence through the U.S. media and the Israel lobby's substantial sway in American politics have perpetuated this perception, manipulating key figures and funding political campaigns. They've succeeded in convincing the entire United States that Iran embodies pure evil and is the primary sponsor of terrorism in the region. However, this is untrue, despite widespread belief. That discerning aspect is the argument that the deaths of 3 American reservists in Jordan justify an act of war against Iran. One would expect greater concern for the tens of thousands dying from fentanyl poisoning annually and the Americans killed in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Philadelphia. Yet these issues seem to take a back seat to the narrative that bombing Iran is the solution because of the deaths of the 3 Americans, allegedly at the hands of an Iranian proxy force. In the discussions with a senator, the emphasis remained on the deaths of the 3 Americans attributed to a Shiite militia resistance group in Iraq since October 7. Despite attempts to reason, the focus remains on blaming Iran for the incident, illustrating a troubling pattern of thought. Upon arriving at the Pentagon in November 2020, questions arose regarding the presence of U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. The answers provided did not align with the rationale, with explanations eventually circling back to Israel's interests and Iran's perceived threat. The notion of U.S. forces serving as a tripwire due to Iran's portrayal as the Great Satan and a major danger to Israel further complicates the situation. Therefore, these forces serve as tripwire requires a concept I found ridiculous and utterly flawed. However, I believe this is one of the reasons why we've maintained those forces in those countries. Also, it's important to note that we've sustained a significant presence in Iraq to mask the reality that our intervention there has been a strategic disaster. By keeping forces there, we can perpetuate the illusion that we are wanted, which is far from the truth. While a minority may benefit from our presence, the majority in Iraq or Syria want nothing to do with it. There's the issue of the Kurds, who have a strong anti-Iranian and anti-Turkish faction. Both the United States and Israel have seen it strategically advantageous to maintain the Kurds as leverage against Iran and Turkey. With 57,000 troops in the region, there are numerous tripwires. The recent deaths of 3 individuals have sparked calls on Capitol Hill to use this as a pretext for bombing. President Reagan had a different perspective on the region. Unlike the current government, Reagan did not unconditionally support whatever the Israeli government desired. While favorably disposed towards Israel, Reagan did not view putting USA forces in harm comes way as strategically beneficial for Israel. However, the current government and Congress perceive it differently, seeing it as an opportunity to confront Iran. Bombing someone into submission has not proven effective for us. They attempted it in the lead-up to Vietnam and during the conflict itself. At some point to negotiations in Paris and Richard Nixon's escalation of bombing to bring the North Vietnamese to the table, the overall impact of bombing and sanctions has been minimal. Instead, it tends to alienate more people and strengthens resistance against the United States. As witnessed in Vietnam and World War II, the Middle East is no exception, making bombing an ineffective tool for changing attitudes toward the United States. The issue lies in Mr. Netanyahu's approach, which seems to be an all-or-nothing gamble. He appears willing to risk Israel's existence in pursuit of what he perceives as the country's ultimate security. Netanyahu's speeches reflect this existential viewpoint, framing the situation as either achieving Israeli supremacy by eliminating Arab presence or facing destruction at their hands. He sees no middle ground. It's uncertain how things will unfold, but Netanyahu's priority seems to be the complete eradication of Arab influence in Israel, coupled with regional supremacy. Achieving these goals appears improbable without unwavering support from the United States, which he seems to have thus far. A war between the United States and Iran may be welcomed by Netanyahu and his supporters who have been working towards such a scenario for decades. Drawing parallels to Vietnam, initial air-enable campaigns often transition to ground operations when airstrikes prove ineffective. While some in Washington may perceive an air campaign as a solution, the reality could be protracted resistance from Iran, potentially drawing in support from Russia and China. This could escalate into a larger regional conflict, especially considering the emerging cooperation between traditional rivals like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Iran, a dynamic not witnessed for centuries. And they're aware the Saudis and the Emirates understand that any location where U.S. forces in the Middle East becomes a potential target for adversaries. They are cautious about sparking a war themselves. However, this caution doesn't imply that they would hold Iran responsible if Iran deems it necessary to strike us facilities, bases, or harbors in the regions situated in their countries or on their soil. This situation could ultimately lead to the formation of a region-wide alliance of Muslim against Israel and the United States. The recent attacks on shipping, particularly those with U.S. or Israeli affiliations, reflect a response to events in Gaza since October 7. Despite this clear connection, if you are willing to acknowledge that our support for actions in Gaza has made us a target for assault in the region, ceasing our involvement in Gaza could potentially halt attacks against our forces and interests. It's inaccurate to solely attribute this stance to Joe Biden. Both Republicans and the majority of Democrats seem committed to this course of action. However, they fail to grasp the realities of war and the inefficacy of bombing campaigns in producing favorable outcomes. History has shown that adversaries adapt to bombings and find new means to retaliate when perceived weaknesses are identified. As tensions escalate, it's likely that other countries in the region will align with Iran, even traditional rivals like the Saudis. If President Biden were to request a declaration of war against Iran, he would likely receive congressional approval, a fact that many Americans may not fully comprehend. Indeed, the average American may support bombing campaigns without understanding the implications of war. The allure of quick military actions often overshadows the complexities and long-term consequences of engaging in full-scale warfare.